We are live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this second webinar in our growing series on compassion and mindfulness in leadership. Thank you so much for joining us. And as you come in, please go ahead and tell us who you are and share where you're joining us from today. As we get started, we'll give it a few minutes and just give everybody a chance to kind of join the conversation, and then we will get started. Again, as you join the webinar, please let us know in the chat who you are and where you're joining from. If you're a TBAD alumnus, please go ahead and also tell us, what year you graduated. I see Ghazal in Phoenix. Hi, Ghazal. Thank you for joining this webinar. It's great to have you. Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining. Hope everything is well in California. Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for joining. Great to have you. Okay, great. I think we, as more people join, we'll probably just go ahead and get started. My name is Olivia Murerga, and I'm the Assistant Director for International Partnerships here at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, a unit of the ASU Knowledge Enterprise. To begin with, I want to pass on the apologies of Dean Kagram, who should have been with us today as part of this conversation, but unfortunately, due to some unexpected family emergencies, he was not able to be here. But for all of you who know Dean Kagram, you know that the subject of compassion and mindfulness is near and dear to his heart and is very pivotal to the way he lives and leads. So you can, count on seeing him in future conversations that we have on this theme. At Thunderbird, everything we do is motivated by our mission to create inclusive and sustainable prosperity worldwide. And so it's such a pleasure and an honor for us to be part of this series. I'm excited to introduce our moderator for today, who is also a distinguished alumni of Thunderbird and is really, I want to say, the engine behind this growing movement of compassion and mindfulness. Tsewang is not just a Thunderbird alumnus, but a director at MUFG Bank. And over the last few months, getting to know him, I've had sort of the pleasure of, being behind the scenes and watching him mobilize all kinds of, varied personalities around this theme, including our distinguished personalities, a distinguished panelist for today. Tsewang's work on mindfulness and compassion training has reached many of his colleagues at the bank, at MUFG, and is slowly influencing the entire financial sector as well. He also serves on the executive board of the Tibet Fund and is a strong advocate for the Dalai Lama. Thank you so much, Tsewang, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, morning, evening, depending on where you are in the world. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Olivia. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Olivia, you can hear me? Excellent. Thank you again. It's a great honor, a pleasure to have you all join us in this webinar. We have a distinguished group of panelists, 2 esteemed fund managers, and also 3 leaders of large organizations. And I'll get into the details later. But just as a format, as agenda, so we have about from 3:30 to 5 o'clock Eastern time. We have so from between 3:30 to 4:30, it'll be a dialogue among the panelists, and then from 4:30 to 5, I'll open it up to the larger community. So just start preparing your questions. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll start off with after I briefly introduce each one of the panelists. We'll start off with requesting Jonathan Rose to lead a 3-minute meditation and also explain what is compassion, so to level set, so that and then following that, I'll request each one of the panelists to give a 2-minute opening remark. Yeah. So before I introduce each one of the panelists, I thought I'd just share one quick thought. One is, again, I'm not speaking on behalf of our bank. I'll be speaking here more as a proud Thunderbird alumni and a great admirer of Dean Sanjeev Kagram and him and Olivia and the folks at Thunderbird, and with the support of ASU, to really try to realize Thunderbird's mission to bring peace through commerce. So what we are doing and what we are discussing here is not new, yeah. And also, it's not only at Thunderbird, but also our bank. It was founded a few hundred years ago with a philosophy which is strongly influenced by a philosophy called Sampo Yoshi, which is doing good in 3 directions: to the customer, to the employees, and to the community at large. And similarly, other organizations too were influenced by compassion, and so the connection between compassion and business. What is different now is that it's becoming mainstream, that compassion being integrated into the whole entire financial service industry, into other large organizations, into real estate. I mean, it's becoming mainstream. That's one thing that's exciting. The second thing is that our survival, I think, depends on it. Unlike in the past, where companies were relatively small, the impact they had on the world was not, it was big, but not as big as the impact it's having now. Now companies and organizations are so large that the impact that they have on the world is irreversible. So for companies to be narrowly focused only on their self-interest is not fair, and it's not sustainable, and it's not just. So companies have to be compassionate and caring, and have to take stakeholders' approach. So this question about unlocking unlocking value and mitigating risk, I mean, it has to be done. I mean, compassion has to be integrated. Otherwise, our whole planet the question about survivability is there. But the good thing about it is that it's not something that it hurts companies and organizations. And as our lead panelists will explain through this dialogue, is that there's actually demonstrated cases that it helps increase productivity, increases efficiency, and is actually good for business. And then there's also, in the modern world, in the current economic system, across different industries, there is a growing recognition on a baseline anxiety among many. And scientists, and there's more and more research being demonstrating that compassion is actually good for your health and good for your wellness. So it's really, I think, the webinar that's, again, we have here, and it's very important. And I would encourage how we'll have this communication to be. I mean, having known all these panelists here, none of them are really here to impress, and people that really want to do what is right. And I would like to keep this Q&A and a nice open floor, and really encourage all of you to ask questions that really comes from your heart. And so this way we could all learn and benefit from each other. Yeah. So with that, Olivia, what I'm going to do is I'll just real quickly introduce each one of the panelists. Alessia Falsarone, she's an MD at PineBridge Investments. I mean, she's in the funds world. We've had a lot of conversation. She shared with me how mindfulness and compassion training has really helped empower her. It has drive her in her work. And this is, she's one of the many in the asset management world that is incorporating compassion, which is manifested in the form of the growing trend in the ESG world. Yeah. The next, James Fisher. So James and I, we're colleagues. We talk quite a lot. We brainstorm. James is the Chief Risk Officer in the Investors Services Group. Again, he's speaking here not as a bank a representative in his personal capacity. He's involved in a bank's culture. And so again, he's also one person who sees the value. I don't want to take I'll let him share, but again, he's someone who really deeply cares and values sees the benefits of compassion in the financial service industry, and is playing a leadership role. And there's a group that is being formed called Mindful on Wall Street, and James is involved with that group to try to bring and encourage, share best practices among the financial service industry. Yeah. Next, Olivia. Jonathan Rhodes. Jonathan is, I mean, many of us are big fans of him. He's one of the pioneers of bringing compassion or integrating it in business and finance. He and his wife, Dana, is founder of the Garrison Institute, which is a place where you can, which is leading in bringing contemplation in the business and in many different sectors, in the health sector too. Jonathan's also been, we work together along with Raj, will explain to you. We serve on the advisory board of an organization that is involved in making the refugee settlement in South India, where I'm from, to try to make it sustainable, because we see that the knowledge of the community can benefit the world. So he's a leader in the real estate world and a respected philanthropist. Yeah. Next. Olga. So Olga, last year we met at, Olga is the head of the environment and social risk at Wells Fargo, which is the, and worked at IFC. At a personal level, Olga and I, we met last fall at an event that a bank organized called Banks and Civil Society. Olga is, I mean, she's authentic. She's really wants to bring the culture change within the financial service industry, where compassion is in the heart of Wall Street culture. One of our colleagues, when I mentioned that Olga's on the panel, she said she heard Olga speak, and what really stuck out was her authenticity. Yeah, so really glad to have Olga. And okay, Raj is a T-Board alumni. He's a partner at Ernst & Young. Just as, again, he's almost like a family like to us. We were roommates at Thunderbird. We've been friends since then, many years. We brainstormed. Raj is also, I mean, he's big into the M&A world, and he brings compassion into it. And he said it's really helped him from a business standpoint. At a personal level, again, I'll let Raj speak in more details. But again, so it's good to have him here. So we have a nice diverse group of attendees, panelists here, who bring a very unique experience and skill sets, and but all driven by compassion. Yeah. So with that, Olivia, what I'll do is I'll pass the ball to Jonathan, and I'll request, Jonathan, would you prefer first sharing a little bit about what is compassion, based on, and then lead the meditation? Or
yes.
Okay. So with that, yep, Jonathan, we'll be doing this for about 5 minutes, and then I'll pass it to the ball to each one of the panelists to start with opening remarks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tsewang, and thank you so much for organizing this and now leading it. You were always leading it anyway. So compassion has 4 components to it. The first is witnessing or perceiving somebody else's suffering. And it can be an individual suffering, it can be group suffering, it can be collective suffering that you're part of, it can be the suffering of all sentient beings. So it has many scopes. It is then not only witnessing it, but feeling it, and feeling it on an emotional or personal level. And from that feeling, the third step is being motivated to help, to want to relieve the suffering. And the fourth level is to actually act, to do something to help relieve that suffering. Interestingly, there's a comparison between compassion and empathy. So empathy is feeling with somebody, deeply feeling their suffering, but it doesn't have that sense of being motivated to relieve it and then acting to relieve it. And we now know from a whole series of studies initially done by a scientist named Dr. Tanya Singer and then others, that there are different neural signatures to empathy and compassion. They actually live in different parts of the brain, or they show different brain patterns, and that empathy leads to something called empathetic distress. It actually leads to burnout, and you suffer from it. And it can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, a whole variety of things. Whereas compassion, it is the choosing to act and then acting to relieve suffering that actually allows you to be with the suffering and not hurt yourself. And in fact, you know, you see people who come home from a hospital emergency room where they've worked all day and some are just exhausted and run out, and some are just completely exhilarated. And that is the difference between empathy and compassion. A mindfulness, it turns out, helps shift our brain from the empathetic side and the empathetic distress side to the compassion side. It's actually the act of focusing our mind, gives us control over our executive function, helps us be prevented from emotional hijacking. The focus of concentration, all these things actually take us into the strategic planning center of our brain. Visualizations actually allow us to see a future, and the opening of the heart that happens with compassion allows us to connect more to the suffering of others. So it actually turns out that meditation is a magical tool, perfectly designed to engage all these different neural patterns to lead to greater compassion. So I'm going to lead us in a 3-minute compassion meditation. So sit still with your feet on the floor and your back straight, and take a deep breath in. Hold it for a second, and then out. And breathe slowly and deeply, but don't force it to be too slow. And now I want you to imagine that in front of you is somebody who you gain compassion from. It could be a religious figure such as Buddha or Mother or Saint Francis, or your vision of a God, or Jesus, or Muhammad, or whoever you might, or a symbol that you might take strength from. It could be nature herself. It can be anything. But imagine it that it is radiating a golden and liquid light to you. And that light enters your heart and it fills your heart. And imagine your heart softening. So physically, as you see this light come in as a liquid and golden light. Physically visualize inside your chest your beating heart. See the aorta going in 4 directions. See veins and arteries. See it soften. See it melt in this golden, soft, liquidy light. Feel radiate out and fill your entire body with this light of love and compassion. And now imagine in front of you somebody who you know is suffering. They could be close to you. They may be somebody you don't know at all, but imagine them. And now imagine from your heart radiating golden light to their heart. It never depletes yours. Yours is an eternal, generous, ever-filling source. But imagine the light radiating light, liquid golden light, radiating from your heart to the heart of another person who is in need of your love and your compassion. And imagine it filling their heart, softening it, caressing it, and it overflowing their heart and filling their whole body with golden liquid light. And see them have ease. See them filled with well-being. And see them smile at you and thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was very good. Yeah. Jonathan, it's okay, I'll just start with you. If you could just share in 2 minutes, opening remarks, what is about this webinar and this topic that excites you most?
So when one thinks of finance and investment, one have to back up. Money is purely a mental construct. It's a human construct that we have created It's an accounting system. It's a holder of value. It has no inherent existence. Gravity has some inherent existence. You know, it's real. Finance is all just it's the series of values that we placed on external things, and this mental model that we've created runs us, and we run around crazy trying to create points within an accounting system that has no inherent existence. Um, so the beauty of that is that, and that accounting system has led to climate change and a whole series of negative externalities. It's also lifted millions of people out of poverty. But it so if we can take that system by which we organize so many of the structures of our civilization, our society, it's clearly the way we invest, etc., and make it more compassionate and have it geared towards enriching the common good, then we can change the world and change all of human action. So this conversation about mindfulness and finance can be a seed to that change.
Thank you. So, Alessia, if you could basically share in 2 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Jonathan. That was great. I don't have any other words to describe. Going back to Jonathan's point, I can't agree with that more, coming from the fund management business. And it's interesting enough, the word compassion I see used more and more and more every day, not just because the COVID situation is so real and touches us in so many grounds. This morning I was on a call with a very large investment fund association that does what Jonathan just said. They take care of accounting, they take care of reconciliation on a global basis of any new funds being launched. And I would have never expected in other times somebody from a very reputable global audit institution saying, how is the industry changing for us? How are we preparing? Well, our industry needs more compassion. And it was not a webinar on compassion. And there was not a definition given. But the beauty of it, it resided with every single person on that panel. And there was nobody asking, what is compassion? It's something that everybody can relate in every language and in every place of life. I think what gives me really hope in the current time and in the practice of compassion and financial services is that it's doable, okay? It's not a thought that we can't relate to. We make decisions every day, from small to large, but what is that we have associated that historically as being what Jonathan just says, a series of accounting metrics. Now, when you are at a time where you have emerging sustainability accounting metrics, where you're starting comparing, external environmental and social practices and behaviors and how they affect the ability for us to grow as a community and as a world that affects, standard measures like GDP, then you start going into our lives, the regular decisions that we make every day. And there's no one that is not small, they're all as important. So I find it empowering, and that's why I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessia. Yeah, James.
Thank you, Tsewang. So I could touch on the comments that have just been made around the economic and societal impacts and the need for compassion in financial services. But I'd like to first focus on sharing a very personal story, because the comment made, everyone can relate to compassion. Ideally, yes, I think they can technically, and they should. But I think what we've seen over the last, certainly in my career over the last 25 years in financial services, is that compassion and mindfulness have not necessarily played an important or pivotal role in the banking industry. And I think we've seen the results of that through mid-2000s with a number of Ponzi schemes, with a number of unauthorized trading incidents, of the financial crash of 2008. And I think that social contract between banks and society was broken. So if I could, Tsewang, maybe take 2 to 3 minutes and just share what my journey has been to get to where I am now, and how it really helps me now in my role at the bank. So in the early to mid 2000s, I had a manager and a mentor who was a very senior executive in the bank that I was working in. And he instilled in me this philosophy. Now, bear in mind, this was the early 2000s. And it was this, it was that all that matters is the result. It doesn't matter how you get there, what you have to do to get there. It is the result that will be rewarded. That was instilled in me. And I believed this for a period in my late 20s. And this philosophy permeated how I lived, how I worked, how I treated others at work, how I treated those in my personal life, and more worryingly, how I treated myself. And I think in that period, corporate cultures of greed, aggression, competition, in which I operated in financial services across New York, London, Zurich, these really supported this philosophy and they fed the ego. And I think this was a very dangerous thing. And it wasn't really until my mid-30s when I started my own family, I changed role, I changed country. I started operating under a new manager who was compassionate and was thoughtful, with a focus on family, creating a culture around him of respect, inclusion, collaboration, and emphasizing compassion, not as a weakness, but as a foundation of strength. And it's then that I started to question my own core values, and that I began to mature emotionally. Unfortunately, a couple of years later, I was dragged into a very traumatic period in my life when I again changed role. I took on a global management role, and that was within a department that was still operating under the misguided tenets of aggression, winning at all costs, and really operating with no compassion and no sense of greater purpose. Focused again only on the results. So over a prolonged period of time, I experienced the opposite of compassion. And this created an intellectual and an emotional conflict between these two diametrically opposed mindsets, which I couldn't reconcile. And at a time of unrelated personal stress, this really took a significant toll on me as a person and on my mental health. And as I came out of that, it really resulted in a period of deep self-reflection. And it felt like I was starting from a place of nothingness and emptiness. But with compassion and with the love of my family and my friends, I took on a challenge, and I took on a new role, a more senior role at a new organization. And it's here where I personally experienced the value, the real value of compassion within that new environment. It helped me rebuild. It helped me regain my confidence. It helped me succeed. And it helped me innovatively and freely challenge decisions, challenge the dialogue, challenge the discourse in a safe space where there is trust, right? Where there is a belief in self. And it really helped me understand what matters is actually how you get where you're going, right? How you get the results. And now, a few years later, I'm in a really privileged position to be able to try and apply some of that compassion, some of that mindfulness, and some of those core principles of inclusion and respect in how I treat others at work, how I manage my team, how I make decisions for my business that I support, how I challenge decisions in my role as the head of reputation risk for the bank, and how I treat others in my personal life, and finally, how I treat myself. So I think it's very important for every individual to have that self-awareness and to understand what compassion is. And maybe that is a journey that takes time. And my journey has taken time, and it will continue to take time to mature and evolve emotionally, so that I can really help apply compassion to my business and those around me.
Very powerful, James. would like to talk more, but but I'll just continue with through our agenda. But thank you again for being so honest and sharing your journey, because I think it's have a lot of impact on others, and I think many could relate to it. Olga, you're next. Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys for inviting me. And Tsewang, yeah, first time when I met you, I just thought, wow, such bankers exist, and that's one of those, I think, points to me being the head of environmental social risk management team at one of the largest banks in the world, which basically touches upon every single sector and has about 250,000 employees, I would say 80% of which are bankers. And to, I think, just before we get into practical tools, and James, I really appreciate the self-awareness topic. It's been my journey of self-awareness and what it actually means, which I guess helps me a lot to do the work I do with my team at this one of the largest banks in the world. And self-awareness has been, well, starting from yourself, right? So I've been a yoga practitioner for about 25 years, and I came to that by some health issues, and then of course we all go from physical to spiritual to how it works for our minds, and then it gets in psychology piece, etc. And then we'll start understanding, well, it's less about you, then it's becoming about people around you, and then of course from personal becomes professional. So I would say mindfulness became kind of a lifestyle, and self-awareness became professional, personal choice as well. And I'm still on a journey to understand what that really means in terms of, is it just being present, or is it also being, you know, mindful of other people's views and taking them into consideration, not being judgmental, you know, not passing blame. And I think there are so many different spectrum to what self-awareness is. But when it comes to, I think, big organization as Wells Fargo, and James, to your point, it's almost banking lost its soul on the way. And I wouldn't be shy to say, you know, Wells Fargo has been one of the, you know, banks portrayed as evil, although it started from being a community bank. And then I came to lead this team and build it up when compassion and finding its soul for the big bank has been more important than anything else. And then if people ask me, so what do you do exactly as a head of environmental social risk, looking at all the controversial and very complex transactions in oil and gas and mining and all this other sectors, which people would always claim to be, you know, some people call them evil, some people call them controversial at best, but I say we just put mindfulness and compassion into due diligence and deal assessment, and we do it one banker at a time. And that's basically what my, I think, role has been. And it's been a journey, and the journey of learning continues. But I do say the results do show that it works. So we are part of all the decision making around controversial and complicated transactions. So I am, or my team is. So number two, we do see that less and less harmful transactions, if you will, cross my desk or cross even banker's mind to pursue those, regardless of earnings or EBITDA of those transactions. And I think three is more of a, bankers come for advice more often than policy requires them to do so. They come to my team for counsel on not just what we call compassion or being ethical, but more of a, is it a good deal to do as a big bank? And I think those three factors do show that doing it one banker at a time kind of works and will continue that journey. And thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
It's our honor. Thank you again, Olga. Appreciate that. I'm going to dig in a little bit later. Raj, you're next.
Thanks, Tsewang. Alessia said a very good thing about the industry needs more compassion, and I don't think there's any other industry more than mergers and acquisitions world that needs that, because for the first time ever, deals are getting consummated over phone. For the first time ever, negotiations are happening over Zoom meetings. For the first time ever, not just the accounting, finance, but the way people are going to be evaluating their own cultures, their own integration plan, the whole value extraction models. It's happening over phone, over Zoom, over video calls. And one of the biggest things that we find, we are actively involved in lots of deals. One of the biggest things we are finding is people are feeling disconnected. So yes, we need a big change in terms of reset on compassion. Jonathan talked about compassion and empathy, and he got the connection. Let me introduce a third element with compassion is the EQ. Now, as humans, we all have same basic needs and emotions. And this is apparent more in the COVID world. Emotions of fear, happiness, love, sadness. In order to be compassionate to others, you've got to be first compassionate to yourself. And again, in a M&A environment where all the value of the deal extraction is all about people, is all about execution of the strategy, it's all about culture. This is much more important. And the more we are aware of our emotions, the more we are compassionate towards us, because that's the only time we understand how others are feeling. We all know self-awareness is directly related to EQ, and the research has shown that EQ really accounts for about 90% of high performance activity of individuals. Not just having emotional intelligence makes us better leaders, but it helps us become better human beings, because now we are better at risk management. We're better at understanding what is the value we're trying to bring in an acquisition or a merger transaction. And we become better communicators. So if you look at any of the deal thesis, these three become literally the pillars. And we are finding more and more that in a M&A environment, these are actually the value inhibitors if not taken care of well. So I'm really looking forward to having more discussions on this, but this is just an amazing time. And I mean, if you take a step back on a COVID time, for the first time throughout the world, the entire community of care providers became our saviors because everybody had one common thing, and that common thing was compassion. They treated their COVID patients with compassion, and that is the reason some of the countries have been able to bend the curve, some of the countries still struggling, but the common thing that connects all these care providers is compassion. So this is not going away anywhere. Tsewang?
Thank you very much, Raj. Appreciate that. Yeah. So, I mean, as you can see, we have Olga and James representing two large banks. Raj, another large organization, the Big Four, and then we have Alessia and Jonathan on the fund manager side. So we're going to switch a little bit. I'm going to request Jonathan and Alessia and then Raj to share real case examples how you applied compassion in business that unlocked value or mitigated risk. Jonathan, if it's okay, I'm going to start with you, then Alessia, and then Raj. And then I'm going to switch gears and then go to Olga and James and talk more about risk, about large organizations and culture. Yeah, but Jonathan.
Thank you. So just as background, our company develops very green, affordable, and mixed income housing around the country. We're based in New York, but we work all over the country. And we have investment funds that buy existing affordable housing, make it green, bring social, health, and education services to the residents, preserve the affordability, because we're buying buildings that other people might buy and kick the poor people out and try and gentrify. So the core mission of the company is good. The pure work that we're doing is helping low-income families, it's creating construction and permanent jobs, it's reducing environmental impacts, and it's bringing social, health, and education services to the lives of our residents. I think this is really important, that the mission of the business, there's the Business Roundtable just released a study a year ago or so called The Purpose of the Company. And I think it starts with the purpose of the company. And then obviously within the culture, so that everybody in the company is working towards the same culture and effect. We live in a market economy, and our company has to deliver, first of all, Everything we do has to be financed. We've never defaulted on a single loan in our 30-year history, and have impeccable credit. So part of it is we now need to take these very compassionate goals and mix them with execution discipline and being on time and on budget and financial discipline. And we actually use that as a framework for ourselves. So I'll give an example. When we buy existing buildings, and we're one of the largest buyers of existing affordable housing in the country, much to my surprise, the buildings are almost never have anything green in them. We will make any investment that has a 5-year payback or better in energy efficiency. A 5-year payback is a 20% return on investment. It's completely non-correlated. So when we put in insulation or LED lights, etc., it doesn't matter whether there's a boom or bust, interest rates are high or low, these save every single day. They're reducing carbon input and output. And as I said, we're aiming towards a 20% return on this, so it's a pretty high kind of no risk, non-correlated return. We in part use that return then to finance other returns that that number one may not be as high. Or for example, we commit, so in buildings, so part of what comes with mindfulness and compassion is becoming more aware. So for example, we are endlessly studying the toxicity of building materials. Most people who are in the real estate business don't know how toxic building materials are, and that they actually are causing or contributing to all kinds of health issues, including cancer. So we're very, very careful to use non-toxic materials. And we partner with something called the Healthy Buildings Institute, and we're continually learning about the components of buildings. So just as a little story, we were using a lot of recycled materials because that seemed to be the environmentally right thing to do. And then what we learned is, so computer screens have over 500 toxic materials in them. They have cadmium and lead and all kinds of stuff. And that one of the things that was happening in things like carpeting, recycled carpeting, is they were chopping up dead computer screens and putting it in as filler. So recycled carpeting actually has very high toxicity. You wouldn't have known that. So by being more conscious and mindful and trying to improve everybody's health, we take it down to the level of the molecules in the materials we're using, and that has led us to much more environmentally responsible and healthy materials, which, by the way, don't cost more. They just require more thinking. I could go on and on. We basically take every single aspect of our business and kind of run it through, try and make it, look at it from a point of view, can it make the world a better place? Can it make the world a better place and meet our investment goals?
Thank you, Duncan. Lisa, can you share like a real case example of how you apply compassion in your investment or in your business units, negotiations, and lessons that people could take?
Yeah, I would say I really appreciated James sharing perspective. I think everybody comes to compassion through a personal journey, and so organizations are people, processes are people. So once we remember that and we associate our own journey to the fact that an organization is actually a human aggregate of decisions, of trade-offs, of people, sort of becoming aware of themselves and not others. In that perspective, then I'll share my own experience. Mindfulness practice and the thought of compassionate living and the fact that it's something that it was applicable, and it is applicable, and anybody can be trained or train themselves in that, is something that has reemerged for me every single time in my life when there's been a crisis. So here we have COVID, but pretty much like James, there's the various financial disasters that the industry has seen, and pretty much, unfortunately, at some point I had I'm not an alum at Thunderbird, but my roommate from graduate school would call me at some point every single time I was switching company, telling me, tell me where you're gonna go next because I need to short the stock. Because apparently every single time I've changed career in life, there was some big issue. And usually I would join organizations that would have a huge issue right immediately, right? So, you know, so at that point you see two things: your personal values and what you think is right and what makes you sleep at night, because you followed and you were staying true to your own convictions and beliefs that are essential part of who you are. And then there are corporate values, right? They usually, in my experience, I've seen in nice brochures and have been very much highlighted on campus recruiting forms or templates on our website, but they stay there, right? And so it takes, you know, I would say James is right, it takes like 25 years, right, to get started in understanding the difference, right? And if they fly by, but that's pretty much the difference. At that point in life when you realize, where am I? Am I the employee of the brochure? Or am I sitting in this organization where I'm allowed to show up and be seen for the pure reason that it's me? I am my integrity, I'm you know, my devotion to justice and fairness, or whatever other value that is applicable to you. And what are values? You know, what makes me sleep, actually not good at night, beautifully at night, right? So in that context, for me, justice has been a sort of the sort of thread in life. I've never been able since I was a child to stand still in light of injustice and unfairness, but not to me. I grew up really, really strong at accepting to not say anything. If I you know, was put in an unjust situation and unfair, I would sort of, you know, whine a little bit in my own, but, you know, you grow up tough, you know, so to speak. But not possible when you sit in your classroom and you are, you know, a kid and growing up in life, right? And that standing up for somebody else has always been part of that. It's something that I think, you know, some people are blessed with or cursed with. So that you bring in your life when you become a manager or where you are running an organization and you see practices that may not necessarily be aligned with yours. So what I think compassion has been essential to me, and I have not again called it compassion at times, right? I just found it much easier to be in a room, to be in a conversation and understand that I didn't need to be right. I just needed us to get it right. And if I have to be, you know, the bad person in the room, but we get it right, and I feel I'm acting with fairness and justice, and maybe I'm the whiner in the room, and maybe, you know, I have to say things that, you know, are not necessarily politically correct in a corporate environment, that's still okay. Okay, because you have happy clients in the end, and you're training the next batch of professionals to be accountable for their values. Now, I'm not saying, you know, we should all be, you know, speaking up and be seen at every level, right? In some situation, maybe career killer, right? But to utilize role models in life, and as James pointed out, I honestly think, James, it was not a coincidence that you ended up with managers that you saw that were speaking directly in terms of their style and in terms of their values to what you were seeking, right? I don't think so. And I've always said, you know, you choose, you know, your manager, right? You accepted those offers, right? You accepted the challenge, and not for the position, right? You accepted because there was an opportunity for you to utilize your skills. And I think for me, I've seen it very much so when not too long ago, probably 5 years ago, I walked very far away from, you know, let's focus on return first. What makes return? Is that something intangible that makes this return that is on a time scale? And are we accountable for that, and when? And if we are long-term stewards of capital, keep in mind, you know, in my life, I do most advisory on what ends up in portfolios that are of very longer-term thinking asset owners, right? What do I see behind them? And it was very clear to me. If I need a pension fund, it's like I need the retirees that rely on me to make those decisions. I could envision my grandmother. I could envision my parents. I could envision me at some point. So it is a significant step into, there is a financial materiality in my decisions and in my choices, in what I decide to put on that piece of paper. And there is also about the quality of information that I provide to the ultimate decision maker. And it has to be encompassing on every other stakeholder. And I'm sure that probably Olga will touch on that as well. That is in that picture. So when we're thinking about that, then you end up realizing that terms and conditions that you have surrounding returns, usually for investment managers, are placed in investment policy statements. And they're legal terms. You never want to put returns associated with anything else than a market cycle. Well, what about we start discussing other measures? What about we start discussing measures for which we are held accountable also for how we conduct business? And so when that comes into the picture, you realize that a world that is based on fees, and probably everybody on this call has seen, money managers, and the headlines, fees running to zero. Well, what about these fees are based on performance that is not necessarily only returned today, right? And so there's a commitment on accountability that the remuneration that fund managers are used to today, and those of the future, will need to discuss and start discussing for staying relevant and alive. Because the industry is being disrupted by technology, and technology is associated with a lot more interconnected decisions than the ones of an individual human being with the other over a dinner, right? So I think, I'm not necessarily able to give you a tangible example of that, but there are numerous ways in which you can think about legal terms and start associating them with other realities of short-term versus long-term, of an asset that you own, right? How do I evaluate that? And again, I praise companies like the one that Raj works at, where, there is a significant step in looking at accounting metrics and really evaluating how intangibles, right? And also M&A, obviously externalities are captured in a price today. That's what drives capital markets. And that's eventually what drives decisions of people that are recipient of and agents in capital markets, right? We just have to make that decision. What drives a price? I mean, right? We do, right? So I think that's essential. And I leave it like that. I'm sorry, probably over 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Alessia. Guys, in 10 minutes, like in 7 minutes, we're going to be opening up to the general audience. So if you have any questions, start queuing up in the chat room. You can email your questions, raise your hand. Olivia, if you could start queuing questions. Yep. For some reasons, I'm having some issues looking at my chat here. Yeah. So Raj, is it possible, can you, regarding compassion, mitigating risk, unlocking value, is there like a case example you could share on a transaction on a no-name basis, how you applied it? Because we have a number of bankers and people in the finance world on this webinar, and it's recorded here. Like people have requested, like, is there a guidebook? Is there like something that people can, how you did it, so they can take lessons and ideas? Is that something you can share with us?
Yeah, so we live that almost on a daily basis. Alessia said a very good thing. You don't have to be right, you have to get it right. I think most of the corporate development leaders have figured this piece out, that you have to get it right. I mean, I can tell you things that we learned from when things don't go very well. One of the challenges we see across the board is large companies are trying to buy digital assets. The digital assets are these small, nimble companies. And most of the time, whenever the value is eroded, it is eroded because somewhere someone did not think through the whole compassion angle. Somewhere someone did not look at the angle of, this is fundamentally a people's piece. This is fundamentally about culture. This is fundamentally about strategy execution. We've seen multiple cases where young startups, young entrepreneurs get bought out by large companies, and because large companies just want to impose their archaic principles, their archaic infrastructures, an archaic IT bandwagon on top of these guys without giving them the feeling of innovation, these people leave. And we've seen cases where companies have very successfully integrated these smaller, nimble assets. And by the way, these smaller, nimble assets are not bought for 5 or 10 or 15 million. You buying these assets for 100, 200, 300 million. We've seen a case of where Novartis bought a 80-member company for $10 billion. 80-member company, that's all. So these companies, the successful companies, are the ones who actually have figured this piece out, that it's all about managing people, and it's all about putting yourself in their shoes. Somebody talked about diversity and inclusion, on how compassion can be there. I mean, compassion is in every element of value extraction. I mean, diversity and inclusion is absolutely something that enhances your own value of the asset, because that it brings in those kind of people who can come out with more new ideas. The story over here is that this is something that more and more leaders are becoming aware. More and more leaders are understanding that they need to be not perfect at it, but be aware and practice it. And that's how you get the maximization of the value extraction.
Thank you, Raj. Yeah, I appreciate that. Again, running low on time here. So, James, if you could, for many banks and organizations, sustainable finance is becoming top in the agenda. How, not only for MUFG, but all large banks, how can compassion help achieve banks' goal to achieve sustainable finance? And Olga, I'm going to ask you the same question. So after James, the ball's going to be in yours, because there are many bankers here listening to this, and they would like to, and I think this will be something they'll be interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tsewang. And I think Olga and I have quite similar roles in trying to raise the awareness and broaden the discussion, really take the blinkers off when we are looking at financing decisions. Financial institutions are definitely facing changing and heightened expectations. And there are demands not only for sustainable financial returns to shareholders and investors and clients, but increasingly demands for transparency around non-financial returns. And I think to the points made earlier, that the long-term sustainable value creation and protection requires new considerations and new approaches to identify both opportunities, whether it's through new products, new client opportunities, or whether it's through how we think about risk. So if I think about climate risk, both physical and transition risk that can impact credit assessments over long time, long periods, whether it's mortgages, 30-year mortgage. If you're providing financing to a location that is California, potentially impacted by fires caused by climate change, or close to the coast, the valuation on some of those assets has to be challenged. Stress testing, banks now are starting to have to stress test their capital reserves through the lens of the impact of climate change, market valuations, long-term strategic decision-making, and reputation management is really driven by some of these alternative components that historically have not typically been part of the deal screening or part of the due diligence. Financing operations in sensitive sectors, and again, I'm sure Olga can talk more about this, but it's something we look at regularly, whether it is weapons, environmental destruction, human rights, tobacco, e-cigarettes, private prisons, or supporting clients or continuing to support clients that are demonstrating unethical practices or who are more exposed to corruption. That creates risk. And mindfulness and compassion are essential lenses through which financing decisions and investment decisions on the buy side need to be assessed. And I think being able to, as a manager and as a risk officer, being able to stop during a decision-making process, during a committee, take a breath, and actually challenge what is the desired result here, to the point around, what is the period of time over which a return is required? What is that period of time? Is that 10 years, 20 years, or is it 50 years? Because the value proposition changes, the risk profile changes, depending on, the point again made earlier, the externalities that you're considering. And looking through this different lens of compassion, and not only compassion to people, but compassion to the environment, compassion to communities in which we operate, to compassion to society, global civil society. Having that, or applying that fresh lens, I think gives management a more fuller picture, so that they can make well-informed risk-reward decisions. And we see that all the time in some of the deals that I look at. And I'm sure Olga can add to that from an ESG perspective, because it's absolutely critical in value generation, seeking new opportunities, and risk management.
Yeah, so I know, Tsewang, we're out of time, but I'll be, absolutely, James, sign under each and every word you said. I would say, pivoting from sustainable finance, which I would arguably say is easy, right? I mean, arguably. So what James was describing is all the other areas of business where it's less easy to persuade bankers to, say, go beyond legal compliance and go beyond understanding if this sector is legal, therefore it's good to be banked. And the answer is no, that's not enough to, A, to be a good risk manager, B, to be, I think, a responsible citizen, what James is describing, and C, what I like Alessia was pointing out. So what about the values of the organization you work for? What about ethical component? And some bankers used to call it, well, it's all morale, isn't it? And we say, well, it's not. And I would share, I think, 3 practical tools when I was preparing for the this webinar. I thought, what can I share from the success stories we have achieved internally in that turning or converting one banker at a time and to be more mindful? So in my 3 things are, so being an effective and honest but respectful communicator. And it's one of those very scientific things, McKinsey has a pyramid approach, and it's one message in one audience at a time with supporting information, etc. But I think it worked in many cases for us where you go in with lots of factual information and you think like a banker because that's your audience, and you are trying to be not emotional because all of those topics can turn into very emotional, I think, conversations, and you're trying to be as effective and honest yet respectful as possible. Again, understanding that your audience might be on a completely different spectrum as you are. So that's one. The 2, for me, it's just kind of that self-awareness James and I were talking about. So being present and self-aware in everything I do, which means literally being authentic, being sincere, and being, I would say, in the shoes of the stakeholders you are representing. And this example I would give you, we had an Indigenous peoples policy published in March of 2017 after the Dakota Access Pipeline happened. And I'm a European, and I literally had no idea what Indigenous peoples or Native American situation in the United States or First Nations Canada would be. So I got educated on that, and it shocked me to the profound level that I thought if bankers don't know what I know, then it would be a miss. So I had to raise the awareness. And again, in unemotional, very factual and very present way. And with the effective communication, with being present and self-aware, with being very respectful, we managed to approve much easier than we thought it would be the global applicability of free prior informed consent for all countries, including US and Canada. And I think it was also helpful that the Codex's pipeline as a disastrous project happened for many banks, including ours, where listening tours, and that's my third point, is kind of you finding positivity and personal touch even in tougher situations and negotiations. That's kind of my third trick, if you will, to being mindful and doing it in the banking environment, where we took lots of our senior bankers to a listening tour after the Codex's pipeline to meet with lots of our clients to understand the history of Native Americans in the US, the challenges they're going through, et cetera, but also being in more of a listening, understanding, and trying to put yourself in their shoes mode. And let me tell you, that worked like magic. So we came back with a lot of bankers saying, thank you so much for taking me on that listening tour. And thank you for making it a learning experience, which would arm me now, not just my team, but bankers as well, being more mindful, more aware, and more compassionate. And then the last example I would give, where being efficient and, you know, straight communicator, being present and self-aware and being positive even in tougher situations, was the Equator Principles update, where we've been for 2 years with 100+ banks trying to incorporate certain criteria for Indigenous peoples globally as well. And we actually didn't know that we would end up where we ended up, but it took us 2 years, not just me and my team, but similar minded banks, if you will, to bring closer to the middle ground other banks who were completely on the opposite spectrum at the beginning. So these are my practical tools.
Tsewang, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent.
Tsewang, there are lots of questions which are coming.
Yeah, so I was going to say, we have 20 minutes. We have many questions. It's Todd on the line. I know Todd Walensky is a partner at White & Case. He had a question. You see that? Yeah. Okay, the next one, David Addis. Olivia, can you unmute David? David, you had a question?
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Tsewang. I work in the field of global health, and we work with healthcare executives, and compassion, as in global health, is also a motivator, just as it is in individual healthcare. And we've seen that compassion both flex its muscles, but also be stressed during the COVID. One of the challenges that we face in healthcare and in global health is that the executives, the people in charge of keeping hospitals in business, of keeping programs running, are very serious about doing that work. And they're much more likely to listen to you about the value of compassion and the benefits of compassion than they are to listen to us who are healthcare workers. And I wonder what advice you have for healthcare executives as they balance their own desire for compassionate and ethical work with the needs to keep the hospitals in business, especially during these difficult times. Thank you.
James, I'm going to pass the ball to you if you can answer that question.
Sure, I'll certainly give you my view. And thank you very much for the question. It is critical.
And James, I want to give it to Raj. So and then just two of you, and then we're going to go to the next. If Olivia, you can put Todd on the line next, and then Scott Bewley after Todd. Yeah, go ahead, James.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, we're in an unprecedented global event, and I think, in addition to the stress being put on the healthcare industry, on individual healthcare workers, on the framework, and on the fabric of the healthcare sector here in the US and everywhere else. I think there is additionally a huge element of uncertainty as to whether or not we will be able to address these challenges and fix them in a sustainable way. So I believe that uncertainty creates stress, and clearly chronic stress results in a breakdown of the mind, body, and spirit, not only of the individual, but also of the organization. So for me, mindfulness and compassion are critical elements, both as a manager and as a colleague, and as somebody who's dealing with patients and their families. It's critical to alleviating stress. I think it helps create emotional awareness, being more present to emotions. I think it helps create emotional maturity, not avoiding or covering up or distracting from feelings, but embracing them and processing them. And I think it results in emotional resilience, being able to succeed through adversity. So in the finance sector, we are also going through a period of stress. It's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. And what I've found is having compassion helps alleviate stress. It helps the mind operate and function at its best self, if it were. And I think that's absolutely critical for performance and for making, and to allow people to remain healthy as they work through these challenges.
Thanks. Yeah. Raj?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. Two parts. There is a valuation, and then there's a value realization, right? So I happen to do get involved in lots of these healthcare system deals. So we've probably done about a dozen or so in the last 3 years period. And I think what consistently we observed is valuation is a pretty cut and dry. There's standard formulas. You start taking a look at the synergies, et cetera, et cetera. You come out with a number. Great. But more and more executives are more interested in value realization, which is all about how do I generate what I said I'm going to generate. And that can never happen if you do not take the element of compassion. Now, compassion doesn't need to be a special skill set that either you have or you don't have. It's almost like a muscle, right? You become better at it all the time. And successful integrators are the ones who understand this element, because at the end of the day, this is all about people. This is all about how do you integrate those two cultures. And healthcare workers, whether it's the doctors, nurses, these are very important and scarce resources. And at any time, whenever we are doing any kind of value extraction or value realization mapping for the healthcare executive, this is the biggest thing we keep in mind is how do you retain, not just retain, but ensure that your employees are happy, feel respected, feel rewarded. And it's not just financial reward, but they are there to feel the sense of loyalty. And you cannot build that loyalty if you're not compassionate, if you're not putting yourselves in their shoes. And it is not just a good thing to do. It is the thing to do if you have any value realization chances to get any dollar in value realization. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Raj. Yep. So, Todd?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Excellent.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all. That was really interesting. I learned quite a bit. I guess my question relates to, you touched on this a little bit, but do you have any practical guidance on how to encourage compassion as one of the guiding principles at a financial institution? And I guess more specifically, if I'm leading a financial institution or any institution, and I'm looking to incorporate compassion as one of the pillars, what steps would you suggest that I follow to start that process?
Thank you, Todd. Yeah. Olga, if you could answer that question. Is Olga on the line? I think I disconnected. Olga, can you hear us? No. Okay. Jonathan, I know you're not in the banking world, but at Garrison Institute, you work with banks, you work with large organizations. Would you be able to
Yeah.
answer that, and then I'll pass it to James, if that's okay. Yeah.
So it's really,
Since timing is an issue, if the responses could be very succinct, because then I would like to have everyone have a ending remark. Yeah.
so there's a very well-known science of culture change, and this is within culture change. So number one, it starts with leadership, with actually demonstrating compassion, being really clear and showing that. And number two, it requires persistence, consistency. And number three, it requires feedback, which includes rewards. So there's another question further down about the conflict between compassion and maximization of return. And so the culture change, for example, has to show that maximization of return, as James described, is part of the world of the 1980s, but not the world of today.
Olga, did you hear the question from Todd?
No, unfortunately, I lost connection. I just got back in. Sorry.
I mean, it's just, practical guidance on how to encourage compassion as one of the guiding principles for financial institutions. So this is something that more for banks, what kind of guidance would you have?
Well, I guess back to what I was sharing before. So I do feel it's important to keep pushing, as James said, for what we believe in. And our team, my team is not, we're not bunch of advocates, so we're bankers after all, but we are with effective yet compassionate and factual communication, bring things such as why not to finance a certain sector or why to consider certain marginalized communities in transactions. So we do it with very, I would say, unemotional way. And then we do so in a timely manner. So I think sometimes mindfulness and compassion might mean you need a lot of time, but we're just trying to be as timely as bankers need to be. So that's an important component to understand that the timing of capital markets is today, is in 45 minutes, right? And then transactions and competition for those is also quite pressing, and bankers are working around scorecards. So we also need to be putting ourselves in their shoes to understand that if somebody's a banker, they also need to, come back with earnings and live the life they do. So we also making sure the value we're adding is what James was describing. It's not just good to have, but it's good business, right? So environmental, social governance issues, as practical as possible, need to be shown that it's business as usual today, and it's not just good to have because you have teenagers at home and they need to live on a better planet. That as well, but usually it's practicalities which get, I guess, bankers tick. And then the final piece, I think we see that bankers are humans, right? So we train, as I said, one banker at a time, and we do it on a regular basis because the bar is getting shifted as we all agree here. So we need to be up to speed ourselves as our team, but we also need to bring bankers up to the same speed and then speak their language, as I said, effective communication. Because if you're a scientist and you're talking to the bankers, we're talking past each other. So, and that's what I learned as an environmental scientist being at the bank, to speak banking language and to be a banker first of all, but then to bring my message to them in a compassionate yet practical way.
Thanks. Yep.
Hey, Tsewang, maybe I can just add to that on the culture front, because I think corporate culture is absolutely critical. The impact one person can have, even a senior executive, applying compassion to an organization can be meaningful. It can even be lasting and positive. But the greater impact is seen through the actions of compassionate teams and compassionate cultures. And that is really what defines what businesses we want to engage in, what products we want to develop, and the standards to which we hold our employees. Practically, in terms of actually seeing cultural change or development. And I think Jonathan said it in his opening remarks. The mission of the business, the purpose of the company has to be clearly defined. The values under which employees are expected and required to operate have to be clearly defined and have to be aligned with purpose. Culture is a group of people, a set of behavioral norms, working in the same direction, ideally. And your culture needs to be defined. What is your target culture? What is an ideal cultural state to achieve those strategic objectives, to achieve your mission? Because it may be different. You may want a particularly dynamic, high risk-taking culture to achieve certain objectives. Or you may want a more risk-averse culture to protect value and take a slightly less risk, longer-term approach. But I think in actually applying cultural change, you need to define the behaviors that you want your employees to follow, and you need to provide them with a tool set to enable them to do that. Whether it's organizationally, how you set up meetings, how you establish your management hierarchy, or whether it's through the talent pool that you offer to management when they're hiring, when they're recruiting. Is it diverse? Is it truly diverse? Diversity of thought, diversity of education. So there's a lot of components, and certainly what we're looking at where I'm working is how we can assess our culture and how we can make sure that we can provide senior management with some feedback so that they can decide whether or not the culture is heading in the right direction, or whether they need to provide more tools, more education, or stand up more initiatives to help change and drive that positive culture. And then that is critical, and compassion is, from my perspective, a behavior that is essential for any organization that has a value of trust and respect and collaboration and inclusion and integrity and service. You're on mute, Tsewang.
Scott, are you on the line? Okay, let me just, since we have lack of time, I'll just summarize a couple of things and then request each one of you to give your closing remarks, like for a minute or 90 seconds. But one of the questions has come up is like, well, what are the barriers you see for compassion and mindfulness? The other is, can they coexist, no, between compassion? And the other questions that people have interest is, how do you integrate it and how do you put that into practice in your daily life? Yeah. So I'll give everyone slightly over a minute just to share what remarks or thoughts you would like to share with the audience, and then I'll give my closing remarks. Yeah. So with that, Jonathan, I'll start with you. Yeah.
So the compassionate view is a relational one, and it's one that sees the interdependence of the world. And the selfish view is one that actually sees the self. So, and the self seeks to maximize itself and protect itself. The compassionate view seems to not maximize, but optimize the system, which is to find the place in which the best for all is happening. And so they're, in a funny way, yes, there's a transition from one to the other, but they're in a way two different worldviews. If you really think about what makes an enduring culture, an enduring company, an enduring economy, it's all about relations. It's all relational. So the compassionate worldview puts you in the frame of mind to see what I think actually leads to the healthiest company, healthiest economy, healthiest society.
Thank you, Jonathan. Alessia?
Yes, I think we touched on that, but I think it's important to stress in the end, we are, regardless of the business sector in which we are in financial services, the most important value that we all take is, and we capitalize on, is trust, right? We are institutions, regardless of which one, we represent, that we are in the business of trust, which inevitably, as Jonathan said, and that's why it's easy to make comments right after Jonathan's, because it opens a beauty and bountiful opening that it's human capital, right? So I was extremely, I found extremely interesting the comment that the chair of the human resources sort of department of a major scientific lab in the United States shared a couple of days ago at a scientific conference. Again, all scientists, right? So compassion is something that you need to translate, as Olga would say. And she said it very beautifully. She said, I'm not doing exit interviews as a human resource officer. I'm doing stay interviews. And I'm doing them often and often and often, so that the values and those sort of what we live by, it's something that is shared and is a responsibility of each other. So if we are in the business of trust, I think, incentive schemes within the industry need to be associated with this sharing of responsibility. And it's everybody's responsibility, not just at the managerial level, but at all level of an organization, to represent those values and to stay true to them. And if the values deviate from what is integrity and fairness and justice, what is mutually accepted, by our society, then it's something that needs to be addressed. And if you have stay interviews, stay within my group, stay within this company, stay within this region, stay within this line of work, then maybe we have a better chance of aligning those longer term responsibilities that we have with short-term trust issues that continue to build in our organizations, and maybe we don't just see them simply because we don't talk about them.
Thank you, Alessia. James, you could speak for a minute, your parting thoughts.
Absolutely, Tsewang. Thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel. It's been very interesting. And we could spend a lot more time on all of these topics. I think I'll partially try and answer the question that was posed. What are the major barriers to compassion in financial services? And I think there are two key ones. One is there are structural issues that need to be overcome, whether it's compensation and reward structures focused only on profit, whether it's recruitment programs and talent retention programs, whether it's strategic objectives that are not really sustainable and broad, considering all stakeholders as opposed to just shareholders, investors. And I think it's, in some cases, the business operating models that are established. They do not lend themselves to open, transparent, compassionate dialogue and challenge and a safe space in which to work. And then I think the second one is ESG in the broadest sense, the impact of financing decisions on society or the environment has always been seen as a secondary goal. It's a nice to have. It's something that we'd like to do so long as the financials work out. I think that view is shifting. I think it needs to shift, because I think more of a compassionate view towards the impact of the decisions we make will create additional sustainable financial opportunities, new products, new clients opportunities, stickier relationships with customers. And I think that mindset shift is happening. I think it's taking too long, but I think that's critical. And then the third thing is really a very personal, practical thing. And I think all of us in financial services, and probably in most businesses nowadays, it is so easy to get lost in all the calls, all the committees, the hundreds of emails, the back and forth, all the report writing, everything we need to do, the work, the daily churn that we need to get through. And it is not easy to take a pause. I think as individuals, if we can have that discipline, whether it's through an app on your phone to take a breath or whatever it may be, to take the time to stop for a minute, take a step back, and challenge what we're doing and why we're doing it, And is it for the greater good? Is it good for the greater purpose? If employees have the opportunity to do that, and they can do that, and they have the tool sets to understand the value of that, I think we will see cultural shifts in financial services that have a prolonged positive impact on society. Tsewang, you're still on mute.
Thank you, James. Yeah, so we only have 2 minutes. Raj, if you could share in 1 minute, and then Olga, I'll pass it to you. Yeah.
Sure. So I just wanted to refer to 2 questions that came over. One was, can survival of fittest and compassion work together? And then there was a thing about profit maximization, and how do you understand the dichotomy of profit maximization with compassion? I don't think these are 2 separate things. Being fittest is actually being the best self of who we are. Compassion absolutely helps us become better. Profit maximization is absolutely connected to being compassionate, because that's when we take care of our people, and when we take care of our people, we take care of our profits. We take care of our profits with a value. I think as leaders, we just need to be understanding of this. We need to judge our own performance and behavior so we can respond appropriately. We need to be more self-aware, and daily reflection, mindfulness. These are all things that will help us. I think the big piece over here is compassion improves relationships, and the emotional connection between people. We just talked about how EQ is literally 99% correlated to higher performance. Compassion leads to that better EQ. As we feel more fulfilled as ourselves, being compassionate, we will become better leaders, and in turn, we will become better decision makers. Stefan?
Thank you, Raj. Appreciate it. Olga?
Yes, unmuted, and I have 15 seconds. So I would say on the barrier side, and that's continues what James was saying, we need to do this more. And it's not just mindful on Wall Street. It's just educating literally 1 person at a time and 10 people together. That's what would make the world more compassionate and mindful. I'm a strong believer of that. And we need to do it when we go for a walk as individuals, and then when we talk to our cousins, and we definitely need to do it with this type of webinars, which could cover 100 people at a time. So that's, I think the approach to compassion is not unified, and that's the biggest barrier in financial sector, what that means exactly. And then on kind of wrapping up, I think for me personally, I do like Jonathan's definition of mindfulness, but for me, what I put together, what kind of works for me practically with financial institutions is paying attention in particular way on purpose in the present moment and not judgmentally. So I just feel this kind of encompasses for me mindfulness in the financial sector. And the more we do it physically by ourselves, I think the more it resonates with other people and more it makes them tick. So, and thank you for inviting all of us. It was such a great discussion.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to first thank Thunderbird, Dean Sanjeev, and the leadership for putting this together and for working to realize the vision and the mission of the founders of Thunderbird. I'd like to thank everyone, all the participants. There were many questions. Olivia, appreciate your support, and all the people behind the scene, Mike and everyone who's been supporting it. Just one lesson on compassion that I would like to share, which I learned from my father, was that pursue money, pursue power, it's important, but do it to benefit others, but don't use it as a source of your strength. Look to your inner values, especially compassion, as a source of your strength. And even I've seen it, even as an old man, and I mean, there's always a smile in the face, and so it gives you that strength that is very reliable as compared to the other items, which is ephemeral, but at the same time important. So I saw it as a nice integration. So with that, again, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for being so open and authentic, and looking forward to having continuing our conversation. Thanks, Olivia, for all your support.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Stay compassionate and mindful. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers. All the best.